Welcome to the second module of the course on digital transformation with me, Peter Sparreboom. This module is about the first foundation pillar of the framework offered by the African Union, an enabling environment. Governments that wish to develop a digital economy must create an enabling policy and regulatory framework that promotes digital transformation. In this module, we start by presenting the 5 types of measures shown in this table. As you can see, the policy and regulation pillar is not independent from the other pillars. In fact, each pillar requires specific policy and regulation. In general, the 3 first types of measures that foster competition, standardization, and openness, are particularly important to speed up progress towards an inclusive digital economy. However, it is key that these are accompanied by the last 2 types of measures guaranteeing that all stakeholders are protected and treated fairly. A balanced combination of policy and regulation is needed for each foundation pillar and each critical sector of the digital economy. In the rest of this module, we take a step back and focus on good practices in the process of developing, implementing, monitoring, and improving policies and regulation. As was the case in Module 1, in Module 2 we start with the definition of a number of key concepts. Here we define the policy and regulatory framework as the collection of public policies, laws, regulations, and fiscal measures that's used to govern a country. The circle on the left illustrates the fact that the process of developing and implementing policies can be thought of as a cycle, consisting of agenda setting, policy formulation, decision-making, policy implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. The triangle on the right illustrates that even though the national governance system as a whole is responsible for establishing and implementing the policy and regulatory framework, and for the continuous monitoring of its implementation, the different branches of government play different roles in the policy and regulatory framework. The challenges posed by digital transformation have given rise to a number of specific practices in the development and implementation of policies and regulation. In the module, we define a number of practices that allow governments to address these challenges. These include a whole-of-government approach, multi-stakeholder engagement, holistic policy-making, independent governance, self-regulation and co-regulation, international harmonization, activity-based and objective-based regulation, technology-neutral regulation, fiscal incentives, a wait-and-see approach, a test-and-learn approach, and regulatory sandboxes. Now, what is the state of the enabling environment for digital transformation in Africa? According to the International Telecommunication Union, or ITU, most countries have a telecom, broadcasting, and ICT policy and regulatory framework in place. However, the increased transformation and integration of different sectors, illustrated in the diagram on this slide, requires a more comprehensive framework than just a framework for the ICT sector. It requires a framework for the transformation of the entire economy. The International Telecommunication Union distinguishes 5 generations of ICT regulatory development. Countries at G1 still have regulated public monopolies and take a command and control approach. G2 countries have opened and partially privatized and liberalized the IT, telecom, and broadcasting markets. Countries at G3 have started making investments in the enabling environment, innovation, and access, and have started to try balanced competition with the protection of consumers. G4 countries have integrated the regulation of various sectors led by economic and social policy goals. G5 is the gold standard for regulation of the digital economy. In countries that have reached this level, regulation is collaborative. Dialogue about the enabling environment is inclusive, and the approach is harmonized across the different sectors of the economy. African countries are at different stages of developing a policy and regulatory framework for the digital economy. 5 countries are in the G5 and G4 category. G3 countries have increased steadily in number from 5 to 52% of African countries in slightly over a decade, and only 2 countries remain in the G1 category. Now, how can governments improve the enabling environment? As mentioned earlier, digital transformation comes with a series of challenges for governments that wish to create an enabling environment. There's no single comprehensive blueprint for best practice in policy and regulation for digital transformation. In this module, we explain how the best practice guidelines suggested by ITU's Global Symposium of Regulators address 5 particular challenges posed by digital transformation. Let's go into them. A first challenge is the growing interdependence of sectors. Digitalization means that sectors and entities are increasingly interconnected. In addition, the distinction between sectors is increasingly blurred. This situation calls for a so-called whole-of-government approach, also called a collaborative approach. In addition, instead of regulating sectors or entities, it has been shown to make more sense to regulate activities like the provision of mobile money services. A second challenge is the breakneck speed of technological development. Also, the ever-increasing volume of data and information is making it impossible for any single stakeholder to have the complete picture. There's increasing recognition that for policies and laws to be relevant and appropriate, the policy process needs to be all-inclusive, and multi-stakeholder engagement is crucial. Governments are also placing increasingly trust in self-regulation, or in some cases, co-regulation. A third challenge are the conflicting goals and competing interests inherent in digital transformation. For example, data collection can pose a conflict of interest between companies and consumers. Another example of competing interests lies in the area of access to information. Sometimes the interests of different providers of digital services need to be reconciled. The development of policy and regulation concerning digital products and services require a holistic approach. In many cases, the establishment of an independent entity to regulate and supervise all or some aspects of digital transformation can greatly help guarantee that the interests of all stakeholders are taken into account. This is particularly important to ensure that digital transformation protects customers and reduces the digital divide. A fourth challenge is the globalization of operations. While digitalization allows companies located in one country to sell their services in other countries, differences in laws and regulation between countries impose additional costs on companies to ensure compliance across the board. This makes it difficult for small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, to compete with larger companies. International collaboration and regional or continent-wide harmonization of laws, standards, and regulations can contribute significantly to the viability of innovative products, the integration of markets, and the inclusion of SMEs. Finally, a fifth challenge is the appearance of new technologies and new business models. Governments that regulate too early or too rigidly can seriously hamper innovation. One way to make sure innovation is not stymied is to use so-called objectives-based regulation. Fiscal incentives can be linked to the achievement of such objectives, independent of the technology used. Other methods that governments are using to prevent themselves from constraining innovation include the application of a so-called wait-and-see approach, the use of a test-and-learn approach, or the establishment of regulatory sandboxes. In this module, we illustrate how governments can handle the challenges of digital transformation through 3 case studies. The first case study is about collaborative regulation in Tanzania. Mobile money services came to the scene in Tanzania in 2007 and 2008, when access to traditional financial services was very low. By June 2019, the country counted 23 million mobile money subscriptions. The Tanzanian Communications Regulatory Authority attributes much of the success of mobile money in Tanzania to the cross-sectoral collaboration between agencies and regulators concerned, as well as memoranda of understanding between different regulators and service instead of sector-specific regulation. One platform for collaboration, illustrated on the slide, is the governance structure for the National Financial Inclusion Framework, whose second iteration runs from 2018 to 2022. The diagram shows the many agencies and regulators represented at all levels. The second case study we present in this module is about multi-stakeholder engagement in Tunisia. In February 2016, a group of 70 entrepreneurs, investors, and representatives of banks and accelerators held an initial brainstorming session. Together with then Minister of Technology, Nouman Ferry, a task force made up of members of the startup ecosystem formulated a draft law and ensured that the ratification process moved forward even after a ministerial reshuffle in August 2016. To inform Parliament and gain its support for the bill, the task force used social media, as well as the new Parliamentary Academy, a training module for members of the Tunisian Parliament established in 2016, to articulate their interests and increase pressure on decision makers. This highly participatory process resulted in Parliament passing an innovative new startup law in 2018. The fact that the newly founded interest group Tunisian Startups handles public relations has led to the high degree of favorable media coverage of the Startup Act. The third case study is about regulatory harmonization. I will let you read that for yourself in the course materials. A multitude of international and regional initiatives constitute opportunities for the development of a more enabling environment for digital transformation in Africa. These initiatives include the Policy and Regulatory Initiative for Digital Africa, or PRIDA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCFTA, the UN Economic Commission for Africa and African Union Digital Identity, Digital Trade and Digital Economy Initiative, or DITE, the Smart Africa Alliance, the World Bank's Digital Economy for Africa program, or DE4A, and UNCDF's Policy Accelerator. This is the end of my presentation. I wish you good luck reading the full course materials and completing your quiz at the end.